Welcome to this higher English video looking at the U in RUAE, which is understanding questions. These are questions that are generally marked by references to using your own words as far as possible. And before we get started, just a word on the references that I'm going to use to explain own words questions here. As is often the case with teachers, you realise that your pop culture references are somewhat outdated, and indeed, as most of my references are coming from the 90s, they're probably older than those of you watching this video. But nonetheless, hopefully they will make sense. If not, there's always Google and Wikipedia to help you understand what I'm talking about. So here's my mantra when it comes to understanding questions. You need to be like Neo, not Joey. Okay, be like Neo, not Joey. That will sound like Greek at this point, but once I get into it and explain, hopefully it will make sense to you. So here are the general principles when it comes to own words questions. You have to use your own words as far as is possible, but that doesn't mean that you need to change every single word in a sentence. That's often what students do when they first encounter these questions. They take a sentence that they know has the idea that they want to talk about, and they change every single word to try and make sense of it all. But of course, that is quite a hard thing for you to do. It's quite confusing for the marker to read, and you can often lose meaning and miss the sense of the idea that you're actually going for because you're so concerned with changing the literal meaning of each and every specific word. Okay, a wide vocabulary is a really, really useful skill when it comes to own words questions, but a thesaurus is not always your friend. Okay, it's not a case that you need to know a one-for-one kind of substitution for every single word, but the broader your vocabulary is, the easier it will be for you to articulate yourself, to express your ideas using your own words. And here's an illustration of an example of that, my first 90s pop culture reference, Joey from Friends. And there's an episode in which he used a thesaurus in order to try and make a letter that he wrote sound more clever, but he changed every single word. So for instance, he took the sentence, "They are warm, nice people with big hearts," and he turned it into, "They are humid, prepossessing Homo sapiens with full-sized aortic pumps." He also changed his own name from Joey Tribbiani to Baby Kangaroo Tribbiani. Now, this is obviously played for a laugh in Friends, and it's a joke, but it is a very real warning in terms of what can happen if you try and just do a simple word-for-word translation, thesaurus style, in an RUAE paper. So whatever you do when you're looking at these questions, don't be like Joey, don't be like Baby Kangaroo Tribbiani, don't just take every single word and translate it literally. So it's always worth remembering with RUAE what it is that the exam paper is actually trying to test in you by asking that question. And these own words questions are asking you to demonstrate your understanding of the ideas in the extract, and then you need to express those ideas using your own words. And the reason for this is that simply quoting or lifting from the passage doesn't necessarily show that you understand what it is that you're quoting, right? You're looking to demonstrate that you understand what the writer is trying to say. So as we've said before, you don't need to worry about every single word. Little simple common words like the and and things like that are absolutely fine. What instead you've got to focus on is the core idea that lies behind the words, and then express that in a new way. So here's my second 90s pop culture reference. If you're not going to be like Joey, you are going to be like Neo. Now, Neo's a character in The Matrix, an excellent kind of action movie that's a bit sci-fi, a bit kung fu, a bit philosophy. I highly recommend it. In that movie, all of humanity is enslaved in a digital reconstruction. What they think is real life is actually a simulation. And Keanu Reeves' character Neo, he possesses the ability to see past the illusion and to see the code that lies underneath it all. And that's what you're trying to do with RUAE. You're looking past the words that are written to the idea that's lurking behind those words, and then find your own way to express that idea. So it's not about the words, it's about the ideas. So if that's your core principle, then don't be like Joey, do be like Neo. Don't fixate on changing every single word, but instead worry about the ideas that lie behind the words. Let's look at exam technique and how we might put that into practice. So here's the process that I recommend going through in an exam style scenario. First of all, make sure you're looking at the right section of the passage. Remember, every question will tell you which part of the passage to look at. You want to reread the relevant section, and within that, you want to underline or highlight each discrete idea that's contained inside there. Okay? Once you've done that, you want to then express each of these ideas using your own words as far as possible. You then want to write each idea out as its own bullet point. And remember, there is 1 bullet point per mark available. Now that's really important. If the question is worth 3 marks, then that means you need to make 3 separate ideas. And I definitely recommend using bullet points so that you can be really clear that you've made 3 separate distinct points. You haven't just repeated yourself. It's also worth noting, this is something students often overlook, RUAE is marked positively. What that means is they award marks for when you've said something that is right. They don't take marks off when you say something that is wrong. So what that means, if you're not entirely sure if one of your answers is right, then you can always put a 4th or a 5th bullet point, in that previous example, put extra ones in there that might be right. And in that way, you're giving yourself a bit of a safety net. Obviously, don't spend so long doing extra answers on the early questions that you don't finish the paper. You need to get to the end of the paper, but there is no harm at all in building in a little cushion, a little safety net for you by putting in some extra answers. So, having talked about that in theory, now let's look at some specific examples so you can see those processes in action. Okay, so this extract is taken from an interview with Charlie Brooker, who is the creator of Black Mirror, a show that you might have seen on Netflix, as well as historically having been a TV reviewer and a columnist. And indeed, there are lots of his articles available on the Guardian's website. They're very, very good sources to use for practicing your RUAE skills. So the question here is asking us, using your own words as far as possible, explain how Charlie Brooker feels about big data. So what you might want to do before we move on is maybe just pause this video and read the extract. I'm not going to read every single word out here. Read through it. I've said that there are 4 marks available. That means there must be at least 4 separate and distinct ideas in here, probably more. So pause this, have a look through, see if you can identify what those might be. Okay, and here you can see I have highlighted and underlined what I think are all of the discrete ideas that he's saying about big data. He says, I must have been a recipient of this. He says it can be slightly eerie. He says they shouldn't do that. He says it's creepy. He says it's like when you mentioned to your grandmother 10 years ago that you quite like riding your bike, so she keeps getting you Tour de France books. He says it's becoming annoying. And he says, and sure enough, you quite like what they suggest. Thanks, computer. Okay, so here you can see 3 examples of phrases that I've pulled out of the article that I think relate to how Charlie Brooker feels about big data. So you might want to pause the video now, have a look at the 3 of these, and try to work out what the idea is that lies behind these words, and how you might express that idea using your own words as far as possible. So if you look at the first example there, I must have been a recipient of this, and the way that I have expressed that using my own words is that he has personally benefited from it. Now you'll notice a more literal translation of the word recipient would be somebody who received something, or it was delivered to somebody, but that's not really what the idea is that lies behind that statement. It's the idea that he benefited from it. So looking at the second example here, it can be slightly eerie, and he's also got the word creepy that he's used. Now you'll note these are 2 different quotes that I've selected from different parts of the article, but they both have the same idea lurking behind them. And this is a more straightforward one. You can almost do the thesaurus approach. You can almost be Joey for this one. And you could say that it's unsettling, or it appears unnatural, or it makes him feel uncomfortable. That's the kind of idea that we want to get from being eerie or creepy. And the third one we have up here, they shouldn't do that. To put that in our own words, companies ought to avoid using data to target you with adverts. Now you notice that what I've had to do is unpack that word, that, to make it clear, in terms of demonstrating my understanding, be clear what it is that he means by that. Okay, they shouldn't do that. They ought to avoid using data to target you with adverts. And here we've got another 3 examples you can have a look at. So once again, you might want to pause the video here and have a look at these 3. And again, practice, go through the process of rephrasing these using your own words as far as possible. You'll see the first one is the anecdote he talks about in terms of your grandmother getting you lots of books about the Tour de France. The second one is a much shorter phrase, it's becoming annoying. And the third one there, sure enough, you quite like what they suggest. Thanks, computer. So looking at this first example, it's like when you mentioned to your grandmother 10 years ago that you quite liked riding your bike, so she keeps getting you Tour de France books. And the idea that's sort of hiding behind that is that the adverts that you're often sent are either useless or they're just based on a passing interest as opposed to something that you actually need or want. Okay, it's not a fundamental thing that you actually need or want, it's just something that you clicked on once and lo and behold, you're now getting constant adverts for it. The second example is, again, much more straightforward. It's becoming annoying, i.e. it is irritating. It is a pain in the neck, that kind of thing. And lastly, and sure enough, you quite like what they suggest. Thanks, computer. And that's the fact that, ironically, it can actually be helpful. And you could also express that it can be used to accurately predict what you want or like. Now, this is an example of a potentially slightly more complex point. Ordinarily, with own words questions, you're always looking for basic comments. Most own words questions will ask you for a number of basic comments equal to the number of marks available, but occasionally an own words question will allow for a detailed and insightful comment. And this is an example of one of those rare points where you could maybe get a detailed and insightful comment if you drill down to the irony here that despite the fact that these things are often unreliable and irritating, sometimes they can actually be helpful and they can actually predict what you do want or like. So in terms of how we might express that as an answer in an exam context, well, as I've said before, I would recommend using bullet points, and you can see I've just done really, really short, succinct, focused bullet points here. It's unsettling, it's irritating, the ads are often useless, ironically it can be helpful, and he has personally benefited from it. Now it's a 4-mark question, so we're looking for at least 4 points. I have made 5 points there just to be on the safe side, so I definitely would get my 4 marks for my answers there. So, in terms of next steps, as with all these RUAE videos, the best way to practice this is by rehearsing these skills using your own examples. So find your own articles, and within that, select 1 or 2 paragraphs that you think convey an important idea. Within those paragraphs, underline or highlight those key words that express those most important ideas, and then find a way to express those ideas using your words as far as possible. And obviously be alert within there to any of the points that perhaps are expressed more than once by the writer, and don't necessarily assume that you will get marks for each of those. If it's the same idea, you're only going to get 1 mark, even if the writer has expressed that one idea 2 or 3 times. You're looking for distinct ideas that are separate. So there you go. I hope you find this video useful in terms of answering own words questions for RUAE. Please do be sure to check out the videos looking at analysis questions, particularly those focusing on word choice, imagery and sentence structure. Between this video and those 3 videos, you're covering all of the most important aspects of RUAE papers to ensure you get the most marks you can for this component of higher English. Good luck.